The Summary channel. In this video we're going to discuss the most important events that took place during the previous 12 hours. We have a lot of very interesting updates, so let's start. And first we're going to talk about the conflict between Russia and Ukraine, and we will discuss the Ukraine's massive attack that took place during the previous 12 hours. According to media, the Ukrainians were attacking the city of Moscow using hundreds of drones. Several sources stated that the Ukrainians were also using cruise missiles of their own production. So lots of videos, lots of updates, lots of articles, lots of interesting statements were made and published by pro-Russian and pro-Ukrainian sources. So let's discuss everything in details. And let's start not with the result of this massive attack, but let's first of all talk about how everything started. And the thing is that this massive attack carried out by the Ukrainians started between the 14th and the 15th of June of 2026, when for the first time since the beginning of the special military operation, the Ukrainians carried out a massive attack in the direction of the city of Moscow. And as a result of the attack that took place between the 14th and the 15th of June of 2026, the Ukrainians managed to penetrate Russia's air defense and to hit an object in the eastern parts of the Moscow agglomeration on the territory of the settlement of Reutov. And that was the first massive attack carried out by the Ukrainians. We haven't talked a lot about that massive attack because during the same period of time the Russians were attacking the city of Kiev using hundreds of drones and dozens of missiles. Once again, this situation between Moscow and Kiev took place between the 14th and the 15th of June of 2026. The Russians used hundreds of drones and dozens of missiles. We received lots of videos on the matter what exactly the Russians were attacking. And during the Russian massive attack, the Ukrainians also attacked the city of Moscow, but it seems that the Ukrainians from their side were trying to test the Russia's air defense. They were trying to test whether the Russians are able to repel a massive attack from the Ukrainian side. And most likely, after the Ukrainians attacked the city of Reutov, they realized that most likely the city of Moscow is unprotected. And between the 15th and the 16th of June of 2026, the Ukrainians carried out a first massive attack in the direction of the city of Moscow. Let's say not like massive, but the first biggest attack in the direction of the city of Moscow using hundreds of drones. And as a result of attack between the 15th and the 16th of June of 2026, the Ukrainians managed to damage an oil refinery on the territory of the city, dealing significant damage. And all these videos were received between the 15th and the 16th of June of 2026. We can see how exactly the Ukrainians were attacking the capital of the Russian Federation. And most likely after this attack, the Ukrainians realized that the city of Moscow is unprotected completely. And they decided between the 15th and the 16th of June to increase the number of drones used to attack the territory of the city of Moscow, and they multiplied them in several times. And during the 17th of June, we didn't receive anything. And between the 17th and the 18th of June of 2026, the Ukrainians carried out a final massive attack using hundreds of drones. And as we discussed, the Ukrainians also used cruise missiles of their own production. The Minister of Defense of the Russian Federation reported that between the 17th and the 18th of June of 2026, the Russians brought down 555 drones over the territory of the Russian Federation. And furthermore, according to information we have, the first waves of drones that were approaching the city of Moscow were destroyed by Russians. And you know that this morning of the 18th of June of 2026 started first of all with a lot of videos how Russians were destroying Ukraine's drones flying in the direction of the city of Moscow and over the city of Moscow. And this is a very important detail. We need to understand that the Russians managed to bring down first 2 or 3 waves of drones. But probably either the Russians haven't collected enough of missiles or something like this, or the Ukrainians decided to use several times more drones to attack the city of Moscow. But at some point we can see a gap between the Russian air defense capabilities and the Ukrainian drones that were flying in the direction of the capital of the Russian Federation. Once again, this is a very important situation. First, 2 or 3 waves of drones were destroyed destroyed by Russians. First 2 or 3 waves of drones were repelled by the armed force of the Russian Federation, but the thing is that the Ukrainians didn't stop with these 3 or 4 waves of drones. They continue sending more and more drones in the direction of the capital of the Russian Federation, and at some point, as I understand, the Russians were completely out of missiles, and the Russians didn't have enough of resources to bring down these dozens or hundreds of drones that were flying in the direction of the capital of the Russian Federation. And right exactly from this very moment, we start receiving lots of updates on this matter. We start receiving updates that the Ukrainian drones managed to break through the Russia's layered air defense systems, and began bombing and attacking the oil refinery on the territory of the city of Moscow. As you can see, lots of videos were published during the previous night and this morning. Here we can see how exactly the Ukrainians were attacking oil refinery on the territory of the city of Moscow from different angles. The Ukrainians were mainly using drones, looted drones, many other types of drones, and the most important, once again, according to different sources, the Ukrainians were also using cruise missiles of their own production. Anyway, despite the fact whether the Ukrainians were using cruise missiles or not, we see that the Ukrainians managed to deal significant damage to the Moscow's oil refinery, and it's not just reputational losses from the Russian side. The first of all, and the most important thing, that a fuel crisis is brewing on the territory of Russia, and most likely after this attack, an oil crisis will only intensify. And the most important is that this oil and fuel crisis will intensify, and this is a very important situation, on the territory of the capital of the Russian Federation. Of course, this is not a collapse. Obviously, it's too far for to collapse, but most likely this is not the last attack carried out by the Ukrainians. They will continue. And now this is a very dangerous situation. And this morning we start receiving lots of statements made by Russian authorities, and the Russian authorities began calling the president of the Russian Federation, Vladimir Putin, to start a real fight, but not something that we can see right now from the Russian side, which means that in coming days, in coming hours, the Russians may intensify their offensives, their attacks through the territory of Ukraine, and will receive more updates on this matter as well. Another important thing is that during the previous 24 hours, we start receiving reports that the Russians began preparation before the next massive attack, and most likely the next massive attack carried out by Russians will take place between the 18th and the 19th of June of 2026. So the next night, the Russians are going to use Ha-101 missiles, the Russians are going to use Iskander missiles, the Russians are going to use Tsirkon missiles, and most likely, once again, the Russians will attack the city of Kiev with all these weapons.
Ай, я симпору.
As for the Russian side, during the previous night, the Russians also attacked the territory of Ukraine, and the Minister of Defense of Ukraine this morning reported that during the night, the Russians used 246 drones to attack to the territory of Ukraine. The Russians were using not just drones, the Russians were also using missiles. And several pictures and several maps were published on this matter. According to this map, the Russians were using up to 8 Iskander-M ballistic missiles. They were attacking, as you can see, according to this picture, the city of Moscow and the territory around the settlement of Poltava. Furthermore, according to information we have, the Russians were using 4 Banderol jet drones. They were launched from the Kursk and Bryansk regions, and as a result of attack, several objects of military and energy infrastructure were impacted by Russians, both on the territories of the city of Kiev and Poltava. So this is probably the only information we have on the matter of the Russian massive attack. The Minister of Defense of the Russian Federation this morning stated that tonight the Russians attacked fuel and lubricants depot in Borispol 2, Kiev Oblast, and the Zaturina oil refinery in Poltava Oblast. So the Russians, as you can see, also continued attacking and destroying objects of fuel infrastructure, fuel tanks, oil refineries, and so on, trying to reduce the Ukraine's capabilities, trying to not allow allowed the Ukrainians to launch so many drones deep inside of the territory of Russia. As for the pro-Ukraine attack, somewhere in the evening of the 17th of June, we received this picture where we can see that somewhere during the evening, the Ukrainians launched 310 drones in the direction of the city of Moscow, and with time, more and more drones were launched by the Ukrainians. And once again, as a result of attack, the Ukrainians managed to deal significant media victory, managed to achieve significant media victory. We start receiving reports that the Western countries and European countries began announcing more and more military packages to Ukraine, which means that if this information is true, this means that in coming days, more strikes on the territory of the city of Moscow we will see, carried out by the Ukrainians. Only if the Russians are able to change the situation, but obviously right now the president of Russia and his advisors began thinking how to change the situation. Now let's talk about the situation on the ground, and first let's talk about the Kherson direction. During the previous 24 hours, lots of very interesting things were recorded. According to the fire anomalies map, we see that NASA firms data shows an unusual high number of fires burning in frontline Kherson Oblast in the last 24 hours, especially concentrated on the Ukrainian-held side of the Dnieper River. Furthermore, several pro-Russian sources stated and confirmed that now the Ukrainians have concentrated significant number of vehicles on the Ukrainian side of the river. The Russians are saying not about military vehicles, but about vehicles of dual purposes. So we're talking just about regular cars. It seems that the Ukrainians concentrated significant number of forces along the river of Dnipro, and according to different sources and according to all these things and pictures with fire anomalies, it seems that the Russians have recorded significant presence of the Ukrainians along the river of Dnipro, and the Russians right now are bombing and attacking the Ukrainian side of the river with the purpose not to allow the Ukrainians to concentrate a critical mass along the river, with the purpose to carry out a possible Dnipro crossing operation, with the purpose to create a foothold on the Russian side of the river. So the situation in this area remains tense. The Russians are trying to stabilize the situation right now. I would like to remind you that during the previous days, the Ukrainians damaged bridges in the northern parts of Crimea, but it seems that the Russians found the solution how to stabilize the situation. In these satellite pictures, we can see the situation between the 9th and the 17th of June of 2026, and as you can see, by the evening of the 17th of June of 2026, we see a new bridge that was created by Russians in the north of the settlement of Armyansk. So the Russians right now are building dozens of bridges between Crimea and Kherson, just with one purpose: to stay on the safe side if something happens in the area of the Kinburn Spit, or to the south of the city of Kherson, or along the Russian side of the river of Dnipro. So something is brewing in this direction, and possibly something might happen here in coming days. As for the other directions, the Zaporozhye direction, nothing special was recorded during the previous 24 hours. The Russians continued bombing and attacking the Orekhov agglomeration, but without changes. As for the Dobropolye direction, small changes were recorded to the north of the settlement of Stepe. Would like to remind you that yesterday the Russians reported that as a result of offensive operation, they managed to take under complete control the village. Today, several pro-Russian sources clarified the situation. As for the Konstantinovka direction, no changes were recorded, just the Russians intensify attacks on the city of Kramatorsk with drones and with aviation, and the Russians continue making attempts to improve their positions to the west of the Seversky Donetsk-Donbass Canal. So these are the changes on the ground between the dates, between the 17th and the 18th of June of 2026. Slowly but step by step, the Russians are improving their positions further in the western direction with the purpose to approach the cities of Drushkovka and Kramatorsk from the east. As for the northern directions, during the previous 12 hours, the group of forces north published another report about the situation on the ground, and for the first time since the beginning of the northern offensives, the group of forces north reported that the clashes right now are taking place for the settlement of Ukrainska. The Russians reported that there are still clashes for the settlement of Losovka, and today for the Russians for the first time confirmed that the first sabotage and reconnaissance groups of the armed forces of the Russian Federation managed to enter the western parts of the settlement of Ukrainska. In coming days, we might receive additional changes on the ground from this direction. Furthermore, the Russians, for the first time since the beginning of the Suma offensive operation, reported that the clashes began taking place around the settlement of Maiska, which is located to the southwest of the settlement of Ryasna. The Russians continue offensive operation, and it seems that the Russians are going to attack the settlement of Mizinovka, which is located basically between the cities of Krasnopolye and Kharkiv, which means that most likely the Ukrainians use this road Air-45 for the logistics purposes. So we see that the summer offensive operation intensifies both from the Russian and from the Ukrainian side. During the previous 24 hours, the Russians continue hunting and destroying parking sites, and the sources reported that a lot of trucks were destroyed. The Russians, as we can see, continue seeking and destroying vehicles that the Ukrainians used to carry drones with the purpose to attack deep inside of the church of Russia. And that's it for the short video.